Alright, so AMD just dropped the bomb. The new Ryzen processors, the 5000 series, and they're coming out very soon, which is awesome. And make sure you guys sub up for more CES coverage. Wolf. So in this video, we're going to find out the details on these products. And we're going to talk about, are these processors better than the M1 Max? And where does Intel fit in here? We're going to go through the strengths and weaknesses of all these platforms here. And this announcement is amazing from AMD, it's great, but there are a couple of really big issues and we'll talk about those. So AMD, Lisa Su got up on stage and she announced the new mobile processors for AMD, the Ryzen 9, Ryzen 7, Ryzen 3. So if we have a look at the SKUs here, let's get into the U parts first. So anything with a U at the end is for an Ultrabook. So thin and light 13, 14 inch Ultrabook will have a U part. So you can see there 5300 up to 5800U, right? So if we have a look at the top tier part here, 5800U, we have 8 cores, 16 threads, 4.4 gigahertz, 1.9 base, which is about 1.4 gigahertz short of what the 45 watt parts do. So, of course, it's a mobile part for Ultrabooks. It's not going to perform like the 45 watt parts. And there you can see all the other SKUs there from the 5300 to the 5800U. So check out the clock speeds, etc. Now, before I get on to the more powerful sort of gaming CPUs, these can be directly compared to, 11th generation Intel CPUs and the M1 Max, because these are for Ultrabooks. Now, are these better than the Intel and the M1 Max? We'll talk about Intel first. No doubt when it comes to multi-core, these are going to actually destroy the Intels. They won't beat them in single core. They did show a slide comparing it to Intel's 10th generation CPUs in single core, and it was faster, but they didn't compare it to the 11th gen CPU, because obviously the M1 Mac and the Intels are the best at single core. And that's where we mostly live, so single core, I still say that Intel will be better than these AMDs. Also with Intel, you get Thunderbolt 4. Actually, Intel are the best for Thunderbolt. I mean, I have this M1 Mac and I actually had to plug in my USB audio interface twice to make it sort of register. The Thunderbolts on the M1s don't work as well as they do on Intel. And then with Intel, you have XE Graphics, which also has quick sync, improvements in HEVC, encoding, decoding, and AVX and stuff like that. These AMDs will kill it in multi-core, but you've got to factor some of those other things in, right? When it comes to the M1, it's actually quite interesting, because if you actually listen to the keynote, go watch it, don't kill the messenger here, but she kept on saying x86. So when they said it's the best this and the best that and it's the fastest at this, she kept on saying x86. They didn't compare it to the M1 Mac. Maybe they're partners with Apple. Maybe they don't want to do that. But given that she kept on saying x86 all the time, she wasn't comparing it to the M1 Max, because the M1 Mac will have better battery life, uses much less power, even though these are more power efficient and the battery life is really good on these, according to AMD, of course. It should be. It's still not going to compete with the M1 in battery life. It's still not going to compete performance per watt. And with single core, it's not going to compete with the M1 Mac either. But in multi-core, the 4000 series was already faster than the M1 Max in multi-core. So don't geekbench me. I'm telling you now, you can go look at some of my videos where I've compared 11th gen CPUs with AMD's 4000 series compared to the M1. And the AMD was the king for multi-core like performance. So this will still be true. They're much more affordable than the Intels as well, right? But will the premium sort of AMD laptops beat sort of $899 student, $1,000 normal price of the MacBook Air? I'm not sure you'll get a premium AMD laptop for that sort of price. And you got to remember that you probably need to go to 16 gigs with AMD as well. So you're probably going to have to spend more. Whereas the M1 Max, 8 gigs, it runs fine, right? So let's get into the other processors. So we have the AMD Ryzen 9. So we have the HS, which is the 35 watt parts. And then we have the HX, which are the 45 watt plus parts. So these things are going to, they're going to crank up. They're going to use more power. None of them are over 5 gigahertz yet, which Intel has done, but they will be faster than the Intels, like 10th generation, no problems in single core. And multi-core, they will just destroy anything from Intel, except for the 11th generation will still be faster in single core. So these parts look amazing. I reckon the HS parts are the best, the 35 watt ones. They're all 8 cores, 16 threads. But for me, using less power is better, right? I think in the thicker laptops, the 5980 HX, that's going to be killer for gaming. You can overclock them, etc. But I think these sort of more mobile packages like, the G14, you're going to want the HS. Now it's going to be really interesting to see what happens when Intel release their 11th generation 45 watt parts later in the year, whether they can beat these in single core or for 1080p gaming. But these should be as good as the Intel for 1080p gaming. Now, as you saw with Nvidia GPU announcements, 1440p and 4K is becoming more of a thing. So once we get to higher resolutions, it's not really going to matter. But for 1080p, they should match the Intels, and they're going to be a lot more affordable. So what's the big issue? What's the big problem? Now, I've talked to a vendor. No one really wanted to take the big risk with AMD, like put their best laptops with AMD CPUs. This year, they're knocking on AMD's door and saying, hey, we want to use your CPU because it's so good, and consumers want it. They already have a problem supplying enough desktop parts. Maybe it's because they're, focusing on these mobile parts, because mobile is much bigger than desktop. Maybe that's why there's a shortage of the 5000 series desktops. But hopefully they don't have supply constraints like they do with the desktops, because that's going to be a real issue, because they need to produce these on scale if they're going into laptops. And the other big issue is, will the top tier laptops get these AMD CPUs and the best Nvidia GPUs? We'll have to wait and see. We have seen some announcements from Asus. Yes, their good laptops are getting these AMDs, but we want to see XPS 15, right? XPS 17. We want to see these top tier laptops getting these AMDs as well. Hopefully they do, but it's still going to be a big issue if they don't. And we'll see if they can produce these in scale. These things are amazing. Can't wait to get some of these in and test them out. But yeah, stay tuned for more CES stuff. Catch you next one. Tally ho.